give you a little bit of my background. I am a venture capitalist, have been for 30 years. And I've watched as some of these companies have really transformed society and transformed the way we live. And it's funny, we humans adapt to change so quickly. It's hard to even fathom the idea of kind of going back to before there was a cell phone, or before there was Skype, or before there was an email or whatever. But those were all things that happened, and they completely transformed society. And so I've kind of thought about that, and I thought, wow, what an amazing thing that entrepreneurship has done for all of us. And because I was involved in Hotmail, and you know, I gave them that idea to put a little message at the bottom of everybody's screen. It was supposed to say, P.S. I love you, get your free email at Hotmail, but they dropped the P.S. I love you. And to this day, I think we would have had a much more peaceful and loving world if we had gone with that. But think of what email did. All the geographic borders fell, and we are now able to communicate with each other all over the world. And then Skype had similar transformative effect on telecom, and now, God, you can see each other for miles away, and it's just fabulous what's been able to happen. And then we backed Tesla, and it looks like they're doing the same thing with automotive. They're completely changing the way we kind of drive around and use energy, and it's much more efficient, and cars are amazing. And then I wasn't involved in Uber, but boy, Uber has made it so that we're all able to, it's like the perfect logistics company. We're all able to move things and people around much more efficiently because of the way Uber started to operate. And now we've gotten so interconnected. And I'm starting to see that one by one, industries are getting challenged. The way we always did it before Hotmail was the post office. You'd lick poison and put it into an envelope, paper envelope, and chop down trees, get more paper, whatever. This transformation is sort of a new way to look at the world. And Skype kind of challenged what was long-distance carriers, and they had sort of a pretty secure set of organizations that were monopolies or oligopolies, and then this new thing just came out of nowhere and really challenged them. And then the car companies have also been challenged now by electric cars, and now by self-driving cars. We actually backed Cruise Automotive, and GM missed the electric car thing, and now they want to make sure they're there for the self-driving thing. And they just bought Cruise Automation for $1 billion. So what I'm looking for now is, what are the other industries that need this kind of transformation? And so I look for industries where they've got oligopolies, where it's just, you know, a few suppliers that are getting great margins for their work, and they're not providing great service based on all the technologies that are available today. So, I've identified about 5 of these, but I know there are many, many more. You know, if you go back, think of all the industries that have already been transformed: music, entertainment, communications, information, now travel. I think we've got some other bigger ones coming along. So they're big opportunities for entrepreneurs. And also, if you're from a big company, it's a big opportunity for you to partner with entrepreneurs who are doing these really interesting things. So the first one is that I identify is my own industry, venture capital. But not just venture capital, but all finance is completely getting transformed now because of all these new technologies that are coming. in finance. I look at us in venture capital, I say, you know, we get too high of margins and we aren't providing the kind of service we should. And same thing's true of investment bankers and of bankers and of insurance companies and payment processors. They're all getting very high margins. They're very small percentage of your transaction, but that can be much smaller, and you can have a much more liquid market. And here are the technologies that are new that are actually challenging these industries. Bitcoin and the blockchain are making it so that money can be moved very quickly and get you a perfect record of where that money has gone. That's a real change to the way money operates. And where the bankers were kind of lining up against it, now they're realizing, hey, this is inevitable. We have to use this. And so ultimately, I think we're all going to be shooting Bitcoin around because it's going to be so much easier than paying with dollars or other fiat currencies. The other thing that's kind of interesting, electronic shares are making it so that you don't have to, if you're going to trade shares, you don't have to go through some transfer agent and big complicated process to move shares from one entity to another. It's just like, oh, okay, these guys now own these guys' shares, and it just happens. The biggest challenge to our industry is probably from the crowdfunders. There are two kinds of crowdfunders. There's one that is for equity and one that's for product. And the ones for product, Kickstarter and Indiegogo, this is a funny story. This is a Pebble watch. Actually, the battery has died, but it's a Pebble watch. And I backed Pebble when no one in the venture capital business would back anybody who made any hardware. Because hardware meant inventory, accounts receivable, tough collectibles, dealing with suppliers. It was a complicated process, and it was just too much to do. Well, Kickstarter, Pebble was almost out of business. They pretty much were shutting their doors. And Eric said, well, you know, we're going to just try one thing. We're going to put a video up on Kickstarter. And so he put this video up on Kickstarter, and within 3 weeks he had $10 million, $5 million of free money, and $5 million of pre-orders for his Pebble watch that he had never made. And so all of a sudden the whole model for hardware just changed, boom, overnight, because you could get paid up front and deliver it later. And people took the risk that they would pay, and ultimately the product would come to them. The one that's changing our business in another way is AngelList or Funders Club or Crowdfunder. These groups are making it so that the entrepreneur can get really close to the people that back them. And the only thing that's blocking the way for these entrepreneurs to get the money that they need is the government regulations. And the government regulations have made it so difficult because they were way back when trying to protect widows and orphans from losing their money to shysters. Now entrepreneurs are having trouble getting money, and so that they all have to go to venture capitalists. This is a way that they can go to anyone on a platform, and it's quite exciting. But it changes, it will change the nature of how our financial systems work, and they'll be much more efficient and effective. Okay, so that's finance. Finance is changing in a big way. Okay. And that, other industries. We backed a woman, she was 19 years old, and she said, I'm dropping out of Stanford and I'm going to change healthcare as we know it. And I said, you're dropping out of Stanford? What are you thinking? And she said, no, I got to do this. It's very important. And she came to me and she said, well, her first product was that she would take 2 drops of blood and run it through a microfluidic chamber and run 50 blood tests on it, and then record that into the cloud, and then you'd be able to keep track of how your blood's done over time up in the cloud. And I thought, wow, that's great, because the vampires are taking tons of blood from you now. And every time I go in for a blood test, oh, well, we're going to test for this and this and this, and each time it's like a quart of blood. Anyway, so this is great, and it's called Theranos, and she's now the youngest female under 30 Forbes billionaire, which is pretty cool. She just started that company about 10 years ago, and now it looks like it's going to be a great success. Now, if you create a great success like that, the existing powers that be are going to figure out how to put you out of business. They're going to do everything they can to put you out of business. When Napster came along, the music industry sued. They were desperate. They sued 12-year-old girls, all the 12-year-old girls who were downloading music, in order to somehow put Napster out of business. When Skype came along, there were the telecom business went to the government to try to get rid of voice over IP, and Skype was lucky. They had a peer-to-peer technology, and they were saying, yeah, go ahead, get rid of voice over IP. We're using peer-to-peer technology. So they kind of missed the point. And when Bitcoin came along, the bankers all kind of lined up and said, no, this is bad. It isn't real currency. It doesn't count. It's whatever. And now they're realizing that kind of we got to deal with it. So what happens is if you have something that's really interesting and it's really taking over an industry, Uber, the taxis are all ganging up on Uber now. If you have something that's really interesting and it's piercing into a new industry, there's always the first approach that the existing power structure does is they say, oh, that's nothing. And then they ignore it, and then it keeps coming. It gets bigger and it keeps coming, and then they go, oh boy, and then they kind of try to gang up against it. And then when things get really tough, they go, mommy, they cry to the government. And the government will listen because they're the ones who pay all the lobbyists. And so the lobbyists kind of get together with the government. Get together with the government, and they go out and have drinks and say, hey, I'm having trouble with this Uber thing, or I'm having trouble. How do we put these guys out of business? Anyway, in Theranos' case, the competitor somehow aligned itself with a Wall Street Journal writer, and he has made, Wall Street Journal, and he's been trying to make a name for himself by trying to gun her out of business, but the business keeps growing based on hey, it's more news, more it's the old just print my name right, and it doesn't matter what you say about me. And so medicine, because of Theranos and other companies like Fitbit and 23andMe, they are giving us new data, and that's going to make medicine change in a big way. I think medicine is going to be much more data-driven. It's going to be who is the person, here are their blood tests, here's their DNA, here's what their Fitbit says, here's what their Body Bug says, here's all this data. Now do you give them penicillin? Or now do you give them something else? And so that's going to change the nature of drugs and how people get health care. I also think that you get that starting to happen. We have a couple of companies in the portfolio that are taking, on the computer you get a simulation of the disease, and then you get a simulation of you simulate many different drugs against that disease. And then you see one that matches and you go, oh, that's interesting. There's a cancer drug that seems to be really good for Parkinson's disease or something like that. They find little different parallels. Well, it turns out that these simulations are getting better than the FDA at predicting efficacy and safety. So down the road, we might actually see no need for the FDA, or FDA will have to go through a real transformation. And that brings me to the next category. So finance, medicine, government. Government is the biggest industry in the world, and it provides the worst service for the highest price. Okay? So if you start to look at government, you go, hey, this is the worst service for the highest price. They are starting to get transformed because we're able to now choose our government. We can move from one place to another, and all these governments are competing for us. I notice as I travel around, I meet with different people who kind of go, oh, how do we get you into our country? How do we want you to back companies here. We want the money, we want the expertise, we want the school, we want your school, we want Draper University here. We want all these things. We had the Prime Minister of Estonia come to Draper University, and he said, he's a young guy, and he spent 9 years in the Silicon Valley, and then he went back and he got elected to Prime Minister of Estonia. And he said, just by instituting digital signatures, I saved 2% of our GDP. And he said, and then I used digital voting, and all the young people started to vote. Apparently they didn't like those creepy little booths. And then he said, he made me, I'm number 3, I'm the 3rd virtual resident of Estonia. There it is, card-carrying virtual resident of Estonia. And so he's creating a virtual government. So we could all kind of be residents or virtual citizens of Estonia and decide, hey, that's a more efficient government. They provide better service than this one that I've got. And so those things, I think, we're going to get some huge changes. And it's not just like the really bad governments like Tunisia and Egypt getting overthrown by Facebook and Twitter. It's like our government is going to start getting more efficient because I can use the blockchain and I can do a better job of a fairer job of redistributing income or of making sure everybody gets their Social Security money or whatever it is. I mean, I can do that with a push of a button, and I don't need all the social workers and all the whatever to kind of get in the way of where we're actually providing help to people who need it. So I think we're gonna go through an amazing change in government, and I think the blockchain's like the first of the technologies that is going to do this. But I think we might be on the cusp of a new kind of government, and I think all of us should be open-minded to that. And I think we're seeing it. I mean, people don't like the status quo. They're voting for just kind of the people that are kind of on the way out there for president, because they're kind of going, hey, whatever you guys got going, it's not working. So we got to do something else. And then I mentioned another one, and that is logistics. I think logistics, manufacturing, all those things are going to change. Almost anything you can imagine, you could get 3D printed. We backed a company, Baidu, that is 3D printing rockets. And so that you can really create anything you can imagine. Somebody else is 3D printing houses. and then the logistics part is really improving because of companies like Uber. Things are much easier. It's easier to get something from, let's say I needed to deliver something to you in the back row. It used to be I had to go all the way back there and somehow get you the thing. But now we have the most efficient way turns out to be, handing it to him, and he turns around, hands it, and it gets back to you in a much more efficient way. It seems kind of complicated, but it ends up being the most direct route to you and the cheapest. Like it saved us a lot of energy by doing it that way. And then the other industry that I think is ripe for the picking is education. Here in the US, the K-12 education is a disaster. And that's really because there are huge forces that really don't want to change it in any way. The unions and the textbook manufacturers and the departments of education don't really want anything to change. They kind of like it the way it's been going for 80 years. But the performance has gone down and the costs have gone up. So I think that there are, and right now we've got some technologies that are improving education, massively online curriculum, the MOOCs. Those are very exciting, but I think you can go beyond that, and I think education is about to be completely transformed because of VR. If you haven't put these things on, do it. It will, all of a sudden your life, you know that your life is going to change. Because, I don't know, I put them on and I saw fish going by me from all different directions, and you could easily see, you could see the fish from all angles. You could look at whatever it was. Somebody built a Tesla in VR, and I was able to open the door, and then I almost sat down and cracked my back because it all seems so real. And for education, having something that's all around you. I mean, organic chemistry for me was just torture. I had no idea, wait, where is this molecule and how is it connected to this molecule or whatever? But it turns out we could, in VR, you can look around and go, oh, there's the hydrogen and there's the carbon and whatever, as you kind of wander around through you could live in the chemistry. And you can visit places all over the world. There's a company that, these are all from Boost. My son runs an accelerator called Boost, and it's focused. It was focused on the blockchain, and now it's now it's blockchain and VR. And it's kind of fun because you go to one of their demo days and you get to go through all the VR experiences, and they are really it is significantly different from looking at a computer with a screen or even a big screen. Significantly different because you control what you're seeing just the way you do in reality, the one we're in now. I actually think the old world of warring for land is going away. I actually think, we have special interests that are trying to keep that alive. And all of the people, these people in government that actually count on having enemies, there are going to be fewer and fewer of those over time. So I think most of the world is just going to be in this sort of more of a business climate, where it's more of a competitive climate, and the governance will be determined by society. I mean, our society gets more and more powerful as we get a bigger and bigger voice, right? And it's harder and harder for a government to sort of keep a society down because we're getting more and more free voice, free speech. I mean, I know in certain governments they're sort of saying, oh boy, they have the internet, now we're trying to cut back the internet or spy on them or whatever. It's a losing battle. I think long term, people are figuring out how to get around that. So I see it as a whole new way of governing. I mean, a whole new way of thinking. It's even beyond governance. And I think we're going to see, you know, that instinct to say, but who is my leader? That may just sort of drift off a little bit, because you'll be more of a free electron. You'll be a free agent, kind of moving from, you know, as an employee, you will say, hey, this is a good place to be working, or this is a good place to be working, or this is a good place to be working. And you'll have a little bit more freedom as more and more of the things that we have to do are up here instead of in our physical grasp. I think there are going to be fewer and fewer manual things that have to happen, more robotics. And so it's going to be a big change. But you know what? We all adapt. I mean, you probably have a cell phone. You probably never thought you'd have a cell phone well, you probably weren't alive 20 years ago, but robots are getting to be great. And we have an investment in a company that's the brain of robots. And it's very similar technology to the one that is the perception of the road for the self-driving cars. They use something called neural networks. And those neural networks perceive. So that's what they're doing. They're taking in visual information and then they're saying, or identifying, yes, woman right there, you know, identify man or clock or poster. And they're kind of trying to use pattern recognition to figure all that stuff out. And it has been very helpful in cars, in these self-driving cars. They can identify a dog versus a person versus a baby carriage. And so that they know when the car needs to stop. They know where the lines on the road were. When I backed Cruise Automation, the guy, he's a great guy, and we backed him before at Twitch TV, but he took me for a ride in their you know, alpha product, and everything was fine while the lines were along the road, and we were sort of on a back road, and then we got to this intersection and the car just went off the rail, you know, and I thought, oh my God. But I backed him anyway. I figured progress. It takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. But humans, I mean, I know people are imagining when robots are smarter than humans, blah, 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 blah. Humans still play chess, even though the robots are beating them. I think people will use the robots and use that intelligence to have better lives. I mean, a self-driving car is going to make us much more productive or social or whatever, because we're going to be able to just stand in the car or sit in the car and it just takes us where we're going. And in fact, you can take that even further, because you could say, here's my calendar and I have to be here at 2 o'clock and I have to be here at 4 o'clock and here at 5 o'clock, and there will be the car and it'll be ready for you. Self-driving, you just step on and it takes you to wherever you have to go next. And then the next one, it'll be a different car, it'll come pick you up, and it'll pick up the other 5 people who have to make the same trip. I think that kind of thing is going to happen. I think it's very exciting, and with as computers get more and more powerful, maybe with quantum computing or with whatever, they will be able to perceive more. So they will, and my guess is they'll be able to perceive wavelengths that we can't perceive. So it'll be beyond the idea that's, hey, visual or auditory or whatever. It'll be, hey, there's an infrared reading or there's a something else reading, and they're going to know more. than we do. So I mean, I think they're there to help. I'm sure but there's been science fiction written where they were there not to help, but they're there to help. I mean, the reason I'm always thinking of 5 years into the future, and I have no idea what's going on today. I have not watched the news, I have not read the paper, I have no idea. But I have a pretty good sense of what might be happening in 5 to 10 years because I meet with 8, 10, maybe sometimes 15 entrepreneurs in a day. And so I hear what they're thinking. And well, half of them are going to fail, and they're not going to make the changes that they hope to make. But at least they're moving the ball forward. The other half might be right. So I kind of start to put some of these things together. You see enough entrepreneurs saying different things. You start to put a picture together in your mind of what a future looks like or what it might look like. And there may be one entrepreneur who just does something weird that changes everything. And we'll just sort of slowly adjust to it. That's what we do. We're kind of good at that. We'll just adjust. Adam, my son, he says to his, the Boost accelerator entrepreneurs, he says, be the cockroach. And he says the cockroach always figures out how to survive and figures out how to adjust and whatever. So that's what anyway, that's kind of, so I've just made a life choice to sort of look at these futures. And the present is like, what? My sense there is that we are all going to be, as we become more, things become more mental and less physical, there are going to be more, there's going to be more value to all the brain power all the way across the corporation. So you're going to want the corporation to be completely, as possible, completely flat as possible. Now, you still need to delegate decision making, but you could be like a liquid democracy where you're delegating certain decisions to the guy who's really good at this and other decisions to the woman who's really good at this, and it doesn't necessarily get up to the CEO. Ultimately, it's nice to have somebody who kind of is the decision maker at when things get too big. But the creativity in a corporation can be much, much higher now. And I think it really needs, I mean, the most innovative companies are now kind of flattening where the office looks like this, where all of us work in here, but then if you need a conference, you go into one of these side rooms. I think that's sort of a much more natural thing than having people holed up in offices and not interreacting. And then, as you mentioned, the collisions, the more people run into each other, the more creativity. And I think you're going to get much more creativity out of big companies who do that, who kind of think in terms of let's flatten the place. And let's hear from everybody, but let them self-organize. So if one group seems to say, hey, there's a really interesting marketing thing we can do over here, let's kind of allow people to all kind of join that marketing thing. I'm having this interesting problem with some of my people who feel like this is my job, this is what I do, because the job just keeps changing. We change things pretty much every quarter at Draper University, maybe every day, but people have to sort of understand that things keep changing. You're going to need to find a project that can help the business. And that's where I think corporate training is going to come into play a lot, or corporate information, so that everybody understands where the company's going. that should be a very clear path. And then the rest of it should be as fluid as possible. I mean, there's certain things that are functional and you just have to do, and iterating and getting them out. Pound out those Oreos, you know, just this is what we do. But as the Oreos pounding gets automated, then the marketing of it, the creativity, the new kinds of Oreos, all that stuff has an opportunity to be enhanced. And I think it's through flattening the organization. I mean, I had a real struggle with my old partners occasionally, because they'd tell me all the things that were wrong with it, and all I really cared about was, if this works, how big is it? How great is it? And that's the way I look at new entrepreneurs. I say, how big can this get? That's the first hurdle. And then, do they have a little wedge to get in there? And is it not just creative in technology and creative in market contact, but is it creative in the business model? Have they sort of really figured out how they're going to actually get to customers, get the customers to pay them, all that stuff? And then you have a certain amount of money, and that limits you to what you're able to do. And so you kind of have to prioritize. And I usually do it by that. And then there are a few entrepreneurs that are just bursting out of their chest, and you just have to back them. They could be making, you know, the lid inside the cup, inside the whatever, just some small tiny thing. But if they have this incredible, you know, have to change the way this operates, then yeah, I just back them, because I just can't not. Actually, it's interesting. 3 have come to mind already. 4.
That's great.
5, 6. No. Hotmail, because of communications around the world. That was huge. Tesla, because it's starting to really change automotive, and you know, and we do need environmental changes, and that's a great one. Also, they're great cars. But then Baidu, that was the search engine for China.
Yeah.
And that almost had, I mean, Google had a huge effect on everybody, everywhere. But that kind of had that country, when Baidu started, was so different and so isolated, and people could only operate in a small area. All those people have become hugely successful, wealthy, excited. The country looks fantastic. The buildings sparkle. You know, there's traffic, but I think that probably had the biggest effect. I think Baidu may have had the biggest effect, yeah, on the most people.